At 6 months old, I cried nonstop. No doctor could explain it. Desperate, my wealthy parents hired a baby whisperer who claimed she could translate infant thoughts. The moment she entered, she diagnosed me, a splinter in my toe. My parents checked, she was right. They trusted her blindly after that. Months later, I refused my mother's milk. The whisperer told them, she says you're not her real mother. She'll steal your fortune for her real parents and wishes you die soon. Believing her, my parents cast me out and brought home their real daughter. I was sent to a rundown trailer park, where neglect and hunger defined my childhood. At 10, I died from abuse. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the day the whisperer first arrived. This time, after they removed the splinter, I screamed even louder. 1. Ma'am, the baby is crying because of a tiny wooden splinter lodged in her right big toe, Martha said politely, standing by the nursery doorway. Brian skeptically removed my sock and indeed found the tiny, almost invisible speck of wood. Amazing. You just stood by the door and glanced from afar, Eleanor remarked, her voice filled with relief. And you knew Jenny had a splinter thinner than a strand of hair? No wonder she is the most sought-after nanny in elite circles, Brian said with a small smile. She actually has real talent. The ambient noise pulled my consciousness back to reality. I tried to speak, but only a baby's high-pitched wail came out. I looked at my tiny, chubby hands and feet. I had been reborn. In my past life, my memories began in a desolate backwater town. I had no mother, only a father named Silas, who was a hopeless gambler. Whenever he lost a bet, he beat me. I lived hand to mouth, never knowing when my next meal would come. By the age of 10, I was smaller than a healthy 6-year-old. When I turned 12, Silas's debts piled up so high he sold me to a local loan shark. I fought back when the man tried to touch me, cracked my skull against a table corner, and died in the dark. Only after my death did my infant memories return. I realized I was born into a life of luxury. Because of a clever con artist, I was labeled an ungrateful, fake daughter and discarded. Seeing Martha's face now filled me with a mixture of terror and rage. But I was too small to fight back or tell my parents the truth. All I could do was cry harder. Brian's brow furrowed again. He stared sharply at Martha. I thought you said she was crying because of the splinter. We took it out. Why is she crying even louder now? I glared at Martha with all the intensity my tiny eyes could muster. If only you could actually hear me, you miserable fraud. I would curse you to hell. In my past life, my spirit had hovered over my biological home after my death. I saw the real daughter grown up. She looked exactly like Martha. My parents eventually grew suspicious, conducted a DNA test, and uncovered the truth. But they were too soft-hearted. Even in their rage, they could not bring themselves to punish the girl they had raised for 18 years. In the end, that ungrateful girl stole Brian's company secrets and handed them to his biggest rival. Brian's empire collapsed, and my parents' lives became a living hell. Martha's face flashed with a brief moment of panic. But she recovered instantly. How strange, she murmured, looking down at me with mock sympathy. The young miss is saying she is crying because she despises your touch. 2. I was so angry I flailed my tiny fists, wanting to strike her. She was already setting up the narrative of the ungrateful child. Eleanor's face fell, her voice turning cold. They say you are the best nanny in the city, and I paid a fortune to borrow you from the Vanderbilt family. But this is just nonsense. If you are going to keep driving a wedge between me and my daughter, get out. Martha did not flinch. She stepped forward and gently picked me up. I only report what the baby's soul is whispering, ma'am. I cried with everything I had to prove her wrong. But as Martha held me, she slyly brought a small cloth near my nose. A sweet, chemical scent filled my lungs, and a heavy drowsiness hit me instantly. Before I blacked out, I saw her lay me back down in the crib. See? Now that you are not holding her, she has quieted down. If you do not believe me, there is nothing more I can do. I should return to the Vanderbilts, their young master is waiting. She took 3 steps toward the door. Brian cleared his throat, stopping her. Wait. Stay. We will double your salary. Just find out why Jenny is rejecting us. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples. You are right, Brian. I shouldn't have lost my temper. Maybe she just dislikes our perfume or the scent of our clothes. No, Dad. Don't listen to her. Let her leave. I screamed in my head, but darkness consumed me. When I woke up, Martha was officially installed as my full-time nanny. Furious, I spat at her face when she leaned over my crib. Get away from me, you monster. Martha wiped her cheek, a cruel smirk appearing on her face. Feisty little thing, aren't you? Enjoy your comfortable days while they last. I won't hold a grudge against a baby. She leaned closer, whispering in my ear. Do you know how hard I worked to secure a golden life for my daughter? Out of all the wealthy families, yours was the only one with a baby born on the exact same day, in the same hospital. It is a bit of a downgrade for my girl to wait, but she will get what is hers eventually. I wailed, trying to alert my parents. It was my only weapon, but my infant body was too weak. Eleanor walked into the nursery. What is going on? Martha secretly pinched my thigh hard, her fingers twisting the skin. I think the baby sensed you coming, ma'am. She was perfectly calm just a second ago. I tried to stop crying, but the physical pain was too much. The harder she pinched, the louder I screamed. Eleanor looked at me with a complicated, hurt expression before turning away. As soon as she left, Martha drugged me again. The next day, Martha offered me a bottle of Eleanor's pumped breast milk. The moment it touched my lips, she pinched me again. The young miss says she finds your scent disgusting, ma'am, Martha lied, looking regretful. Because I had always struggled with feeding, Eleanor believed her. Then Martha offered a formula she had bought. I clamped my jaws shut, but Martha used the drug again. In my semi-conscious state, she forced the bottle down my throat. See, ma'am. She has no problem with formula. This happened repeatedly until my parents trusted her completely. Eleanor grew more anxious by the day. One evening, she asked Brian, why does our baby hate us so much? Brian looked at Martha. Has she said anything else? Is it our clothes? Our scent? Martha knew her moment had come. She dropped to her knees, looking terrified. Actually, the young miss has said some things. I didn't dare repeat them because they were so shocking. But she has repeated them so many times, I am certain of what she is saying. At Brian's nod, she continued. She says she hates your touch because you are not her real parents. She says when she grows up, she will take your wealth to honor her real family. And she wishes you would both die soon so she can inherit everything. 3. In my past life, those words became a thorn in my parents' hearts. Even after finding their real daughter, they initially wanted to keep me. But Martha's relentless psychological dripping wore them down. Later, she framed me for hurting the real daughter, and they finally sent me away. Now, I watched my parents anxiously. Brian's expression was unreadable. Eleanor was furious. This is ridiculous. She is 6 months old. Even if she weren't ours, how could an infant say such things? Martha remained calm and solemn. Every soul has a script they read before reincarnating. God makes babies mute for the first year because it takes that long for the veil of forgetfulness to fully set in. My parents did not fully believe it, but the seed of doubt was planted. Over the next few weeks, Martha kept reporting my thoughts. Most were trivial things, like which toys I liked or which clothes I preferred. But she masterfully slipped in poison. The young miss says your real daughter is starving in a filthy backwater town. She says her real father is a man named Silas, a proud, strong man. She seems happy today. She says your real daughter is about to be beaten to death by her gambling father, and then no one will compete with her. My parents looked at me with growing distress. Martha kept me isolated. Whenever they tried to get close, she found a way to make me cry. Slowly, Eleanor broke. Brian, what if it is true? Let's just run an investigation. We have nothing to lose. But if our real daughter is out there? Brian agreed and sent his assistant to investigate. Very quickly, they tracked down a baby girl of my exact age living with a gambler named Silas in a rural trailer park. The moment they brought the real daughter back, they ran a DNA test. The results came back that afternoon. She was a perfect match. 4. The moment the results were revealed, Eleanor wept, clutching the baby girl, whom they named Daisy. My poor baby, you have suffered so much. I lay in my crib nearby. Eleanor did not even look at me. Brian, being cautious, ordered an investigation into how the swap happened. The assistant quickly reported back that a negligent nurse at the hospital had mixed up the bassinet tags. With that, Brian's doubts vanished. He held Eleanor and Daisy close. We are whole now. Martha stood behind them, barely concealing her triumphant smirk. She had successfully secured a life of infinite wealth for her daughter. I cried, terrified. Was history repeating itself? My crying drew my parents' attention. Jenny has been with us for months, Eleanor said softly, looking conflicted. We aren't strapped for cash. We can afford to raise her too. Let's keep her. Martha chimed in immediately. Have you forgotten what she said? She is a danger to this house. Brian sighed. If what you say is true, the forgetfulness will kick in soon. She is just a baby. We will raise her right. Martha paled. She knew that as long as I stayed, my physical resemblance to my parents would eventually expose the truth. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to crawl away whenever Daisy was near, depriving Martha of any opportunity to frame me. Frustrated, Martha finally lost her patience. One afternoon, while Eleanor was in her room and Brian was in his study, Martha grabbed my hand and tried to force my fingernails into Daisy's skin. I clenched my fists tight, refusing to scratch her. Seeing that Daisy wasn't crying, Martha grew desperate. She grabbed my hand, squeezed my fingers, and used her own sharp nail to slice a deep gash into Daisy's arm. Daisy screamed in pain. Martha wailed at the top of her lungs. Brian. Eleanor. Help. My parents rushed into the nursery. Martha was kneeling, cradling a crying Daisy. I walked in and saw Jenny clawing at Daisy. She looked so vicious, not like a baby at all. She was screaming in her mind that she wanted to kill Daisy so she could keep her place as the sole heiress. Eleanor whispered, "Is she truly born evil?" I flailed desperately. No. That is not what happened. This was my last chance. If I was sent away now, I would die. Brian closed his eyes and sighed. Send her away. Martha beamed, reaching down to grab me. And then, I summoned every ounce of infant strength I had, and threw myself over the edge of the crib. The corner of the wooden rail snagged my romper, tearing it wide open, revealing a torso covered in dark, purple bruises. The sound of my body hitting the thick, carpeted floor of the nursery was a dull thud, followed immediately by the tearing of the soft cotton romper. For a second, the room fell dead silent. The only sound was Daisy's high-pitched, steady wailing from the other side of the room. I lay on the floor, my breath knocked out of me, staring up at the high ceiling. But I didn't care about the pain of the fall. All that mattered was the exposed skin of my ribs and stomach. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brian, who had been about to turn away, froze. His eyes locked onto my torso. Underneath the torn fabric, my pale baby skin was mapped with a horrifying constellation of deep purple and yellow bruises. They were small, circular, and distinctly clustered, unmistakable marks of skin being pinched and twisted with immense force. What is that? Eleanor's voice shook, the anger she had felt just moments ago evaporating into sheer horror. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside me. Her hands hovered over my tiny body, trembling, terrified to touch me and cause more pain. Brian, look at her. What are those marks? Martha's face went entirely bloodless. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the serene, spiritual nanny slipped, revealing the raw panic of a cornered predator. But she recovered quickly, dropping to her knees beside Eleanor. Oh, the poor sweet angel. Martha cried, her voice dripping with artificial distress. I knew it. The dark spirits inhabiting her soul are tearing her apart from the inside. She thrashes and pinches herself in her sleep when she speaks to the other side. I tried to pray over her, but the malice in her spirit is too strong. Shut up, Brian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold, vibrating authority that made the room temperature feel like it had dropped 10 degrees. He walked over, pushed Martha aside with a firm, unyielding sweep of his arm, and knelt next to Eleanor. Brian reached down, his large, warm hand surprisingly gentle as he scooped me up. I didn't cry this time. I leaned my small head against his shoulder, letting out a soft, trembling sigh. I needed him to feel the contrast, that without Martha's hidden torments, I was just a vulnerable baby seeking comfort from her father. These aren't self-inflicted, Brian said, his fingers tracing a pair of bruises on my side. A 6-month-old baby doesn't have the motor skills or the physical strength to pinch her own flesh until it turns black. And these marks, they are the size of adult fingertips. Are you saying someone did this to her? Eleanor's eyes welled with tears as she looked from me to Martha, and then to the doorway where the other household staff stood. But who? We have cameras in the hallways, security at the gates. But not in the nursery, Brian said slowly, his gaze shifting to the corner of the room where the baby monitor sat. Because Martha insisted that baby monitors with video feeds emit harmful electromagnetic waves that disrupt a child's spiritual aura. Isn't that right, Martha? Martha swallowed hard, her collarbone twitching. Mr. Vance, I only suggest what is best for the child's delicate spiritual health. If you think I had anything to do with this. I didn't say you did, Brian interrupted, his eyes narrowing. But you are her primary caregiver. You spend 18 hours a day alone with her. If someone was abusing my daughter under your watch without you noticing, then you are either criminally negligent or actively complicit. He stood up, holding me securely against his chest. We are going to the hospital. Right now. No. Martha blurted out, her voice slightly too sharp, too desperate. She quickly softened her tone, raising her hands in a placating gesture. I mean, Mr. Vance, taking her to a public hospital will spark rumors. The media will catch wind of child abuse allegations in the Vance household. It will ruin the family reputation. Let me call a private spiritual healer, or perhaps a trusted family doctor who can handle this quietly. I don't give a damn about the media, Brian said coldly. And I don't trust your healers. Eleanor, pack Daisy's things. We're taking both of them to St. Jude's Pediatric. The sterile, white light of the private examination room felt stark and unforgiving. I sat on the examination table, supported by Eleanor's arm. She hadn't stopped crying since we left the mansion. Joseph Sterling, a senior pediatrician who had handled the Vance family's medical needs for over a decade, examined the bruises on my chest and thighs under a magnifying lamp. His expression grew progressively grimmer with every passing second. These are non-accidental trauma, Dr. Sterling said, pulling his stethoscope away. He looked directly at Brian and Eleanor. Specifically, these are deep tissue pinch marks. The skin has been twisted. Based on the healing stages of the bruises, some are fresh, less than 24 hours old, while others are at least a week old. This has been happening systematically. Eleanor let out a strangled sob, burying her face in Brian's shoulder. My baby, my poor baby. Is there any chance she could have done this to herself? Brian asked, his voice tight. Absolutely none, Dr. Sterling replied firmly. A child of her age lacks the hand-eye coordination and the grip strength to cause this kind of localized deep bruising. Furthermore, look at the placement. These are in areas hidden by her diaper and her rompers. Whoever did this knew exactly how to inflict maximum pain while keeping the abuse hidden from casual observation. The truth was out. The physical evidence was undeniable, stripping away the mystical nonsense Martha had spun. My parents were wealthy, educated people who had been temporarily blinded by their desperation and grief. But faced with cold clinical facts from a trusted medical professional, the fog in their minds began to clear. And there's something else, Dr. Sterling added, looking at the charts. Jenny's weight gain has stalled. For a baby of her age, she is showing signs of mild dehydration and lethargy that don't align with her feeding schedule. You said she was rejecting her mother's milk but accepting formula? Yes, Eleanor whispered. Martha said Jenny hated my scent and my milk. But she took the formula Martha prepared without any trouble. I ran a quick blood panel while we were checking her, Dr. Sterling said, holding up a printout. We found traces of a mild pediatric sedative in her system. It's a compound often found in over-the-counter sleep aids for adults. Highly dangerous for infants in unregulated doses. It explains the lethargy. It seems someone was drugging her to keep her quiet, likely forcing her to feed only when she was semi-conscious. Eleanor looked like she was about to faint. The realization that she had handed her flesh and blood over to a monster who drugged and tortured her was too much to bear. Martha, Brian whispered, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. She was drugging my daughter. He turned to his personal security detail standing outside the room. Find Martha. Lock her in the guest house. Do not let her leave the property under any circumstances. If she tries to run, use whatever force is necessary to detain her. When we returned to the estate, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Martha was waiting in the nursery, her bags packed. She had clearly tried to slip away while we were at the hospital, but Brian's security team had already locked down the gates. 2 burly guards stood at the nursery door, blocking her exit. What is the meaning of this? Martha demanded, trying to maintain her indignant, aristocratic nanny persona. I am a respected professional. You cannot keep me here against my will. The Vanderbilt family will hear of this. Brian walked into the room, holding me. Eleanor followed, holding Daisy. The Vanderbilts don't know who you are, Brian said, tossing a folder onto the table. I had my assistant call them on the way back from the hospital. You worked for them as a temporary night nurse for exactly 2 weeks before you were dismissed for unprofessional conduct and suspicion of theft. You weren't borrowed from them. You used a forged letter of recommendation to get into our house. Martha's eyes widened, her chest heaving. That's a lie. A conspiracy. By jealous rivals. Save it, Brian snapped. He sat down, placing me gently on his lap. For the first time in months, I felt safe. I reached up and grabbed his thumb, holding onto it with all the strength in my tiny hand. He looked down at me, his eyes softening with a deep, aching guilt, before turning back to Martha with pure venom. The police are on their way, Brian said. But before they get here, you are going to tell me the truth. Dr. Sterling found sedatives in Jenny's blood. He identified the bruises as adult finger pinches. You are going to prison for child abuse, Martha. That is a guarantee. But depending on how much you tell me. Right now, I might decide not to ruin your daughter's life along with yours. At the mention of her daughter, Martha's composure finally shattered. The smug, mysterious smile she always wore dissolved into a mask of pure terror. My daughter, she stammered. What do you mean? My daughter has nothing to do with this. Doesn't she? Brian leaned forward, his gaze piercing. You've spent months telling us what our real daughter was doing. You knew exactly where Silas was. You knew the exact trailer park, the exact town. My investigators found Silas within 48 hours because you practically gave them a map. How did you have all this information, Martha? How did a nanny from the city know the precise location of a gambler in a backwater town? Martha remained silent, her lips trembling. I'll tell you how, Brian continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because the negligent nurse at the hospital who swapped the bassinet tags wasn't negligent at all. We tracked her bank accounts. She received a payment of $50,000 6 months ago. The account that sent the money belongs to a shell company registered in your name. Eleanor gasped, looking at Daisy in her arms, then at Martha. No, it can't be. The DNA test, Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. But the DNA test said Daisy was our daughter. We ran the test ourselves. We ran the test through the clinic Martha recommended, Brian said, his voice laced with bitter self-reproach. The lab technician who processed the sample was a cousin of Martha's ex-husband. I've already sent a security team to bring him in. We are running a new DNA test tonight. An independent, high-security test through the state police forensic lab. He looked at the baby in Eleanor's arms, the baby they had named Daisy, the baby they thought was theirs. Daisy isn't our daughter, Brian said, the realization settling heavily in his chest. She is your daughter, Martha. You swapped your own child with ours at birth, sent my daughter to live with a violent gambler, and then planned to rescue your daughter so she would inherit the Vance fortune. And to make sure we never loved Jenny, you abused her, drugged her, and manipulated us into hating her. The room was silent, save for the sound of Martha's ragged breathing. She looked at Brian, then at Eleanor, and finally at me. The realization that her grand, elaborate scheme, a plan she had spent years preparing, a plan that had succeeded perfectly in my past life, had fallen apart because a 6-month-old baby had thrown herself out of a crib was entirely beyond her comprehension. How? Martha whispered, her voice cracked and hollow. She stared at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of hatred and fear. How did you do it? You're just a baby. You shouldn't have been able to, you shouldn't have known. I didn't blink. I stared right back at her, letting the silence of the room be my answer. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Martha was arrested on charges of child abuse, kidnapping, forgery, and conspiracy. The lab technician who had falsified the DNA test was arrested 3 hours later, quickly turning state's evidence to save himself. The second DNA test results came back 48 hours later. I was, without a shadow of a doubt, Jenny Vance, the biological daughter of Brian and Eleanor Vance. The baby they had named Daisy was indeed Martha's biological child. The gambler, Silas, was actually Martha's brother. He had agreed to raise Martha's child in the squalor of the trailer park for a few months, pretending she was his own, so that the miraculous discovery would feel authentic when the Vances finally investigated. He was paid handsomely from Martha's savings, expecting to receive a massive payout once Daisy inherited the Vance estate. Silas was arrested the following morning. When the police raided his trailer, they found the remaining cash Martha had paid him, along with evidence linking them to the hospital tag swap. The nursery was completely remodeled over the weekend. Every trace of Martha's presence was erased. The heavy, dark drapes were replaced with bright, sheer linen that let the morning sun flood the room. The quiet, tense atmosphere that had hung over the household for months dissipated, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful noise of a family healing. One evening, Eleanor sat in the rocking chair, holding me close against her chest. She wasn't wearing any perfume, and the scent of her skin was warm and familiar. She sang a soft, quiet lullaby, her tears falling gently onto my forehead. "I'm so sorry, Jenny," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. I'm so sorry I let her hurt you." I reached up, my tiny fingers brushing against her cheek, wiping away a tear. I let out a soft, happy coo, burying my face in her shoulder. Brian walked into the room, stepping quietly. He knelt beside the chair, wrapping his large arms around both of us. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, silent promise, a promise that he would spend the rest of his life making sure I was safe, loved, and protected. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of my parents' embrace. The nightmare of my past life was gone. The trailer park, the cold, the hunger, the dark corner where I had died at 10 years old, all of it had been erased, replaced by a future of infinite possibilities. I had rewritten my story. And this time, we were going to live happily ever after.